Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are back in War looking at some of the premiums that I think are worth buying when it comes to Japan. So let's get started with the army part of the game. First of all, you have, of course, the Rogo. The Rogo is probably the worst heavy tank when it comes to 1.3. A lot of nations have these large heavy tanks on board at lower tiers just to have a bit of fun with. The Rogo is not one which is that fun. Main reason is because it has this heat round for its 70mm main gun, which doesn't do a ton of damage. Doesn't really have too many secondary turrets apart from the 37mm, and the 37mm doesn't exactly pen a lot. It also has absolutely no armor, and it's the size of an apartment complex, so therefore it gets killed really easily. If you want to have a little bit of fun when it comes to these tanks, the lighter, heavier tanks at rank 1, the massive machines, there are much better options like the offerings from the Soviets. Then you have the 2.5 shotgun. The 2.5 shotgun has other issues. The fact that it only has HE means that its gun with a very long reload for its BR is really not good. Basically you have to hope that you face stuff which has no armor, and most of the time you will face stuff that has armor. So therefore there is not really much point in using this thing. This thing's just a derp gun, but unfortunately doesn't have enough derp to be useful. Then you got the Chi-He 5th Regiment. It's worth picking up the beginners pack for War Thunder. It is 50% off, at least right now, when it comes to the Steam store. Definitely worth having a look at. It's just a direct copy of the Chi-He in the tree. It has, access to the 47, which does a decent amount of damage when it pens, has good armor, has good mobility, has pretty much good everything for 2.3, and definitely a good tank. I believe also it has a stabilizer. The Chi-Nu 2 is the crown of the premiums when it comes to the Japanese. It has good rewards for its level, 444% and also 330% on the SL. It has a gun which is equivalent to the 4.7 gun that you find on the Cheeto and the Cheeto Late, and it's actually part of the event lineup that I personally run for Japan when it comes to stuff like the winter event. Basically the Cheeto Late, the Cheeto, and also the Chi-Nu 2. All of them are incredibly useful, and the great thing about the Chi-Nu 2 is that you can also run it with a 3-3 lineup along with the Soki, NATO, and M24 and use it as kind of the crown tank, and then if you don't do crazy well on it, you can always bring the M24 and then get in a plane from there. It does suffer a little bit from not having a full lineup, but overall it can carry itself. It's got a good gun depression, it's got great pen on the gun, and also with that great pen has a ridiculous explosive mass for the rounds. The Type 4 Coup has 80 grams of TNT equivalent, meaning that if you pen, you're going to annihilate a vehicle, and the reload is good enough as well. It's a little bit slow, but it's still got a turret, so you can turn 360. Definitely worth it in my opinion. Then you got the heavy tank number 6. It's a Tiger, doesn't have a lineup around it and therefore struggles. It has the obvious weaknesses of being a Tiger, and has those wonderful weak spots that are very easy to pen, and the gun's nice. If you play defensively it works very well, but it still has its issues, mainly the lineup issues. Then you got the Hurry prototype. It has a lineup around it nowadays with the Bulldog and also the M42. You can also run it with the STAs if you want. It's okay at 6.3. The Hori prototype is a pretty nice machine with its 105mm gun. Has good gun depression, has quite trolley armor if people don't know where to shoot it, because you don't see too many of these things nowadays. You can shoot it here, which will knock out its transmission, but then it will still be able to shoot you. It also has a decent amount of armor on the sides here, but generally that's where you want to shoot it. You want to shoot it right here, take out the gunner and the loader, but then it's able to move. It's quite a survivable vehicle, meaning that it won't get one-shot a lot unless you get pinged in the side, but generally you can forward face the enemy, angle a little bit like here, put the gun, towards the enemy, and you can do pretty well in it. The Ho reproduction is one of my favorite vehicles when it comes to the Japanese tech tree. There's a lot of really, fun ways of playing it, and the Ho prototype is no different. It's just a slightly weaker version of it. And even though it has a long reload, this 105 has ridiculous pen and ridiculous damage. So you don't have to worry about, you know, having to two-tap enemies. You can just one-tap them. It is a really cool vehicle. It's really fun to play, and also it has 534 and 420% RP on it, which is really nice and can be used to be able to grind out these vehicles here if you don't really like the STAs, which I can understand. They have a bit of a rough stock grind, but once you get past that, it's not too bad. Then you got the Type 75 MLRS. This thing is useless. Don't ever buy this if you value your money. The Type 75 MLRS is just a rocket launcher, and it has access to 130mm rockets. It's been bugged for a long time. There's a weird bug with it where basically sometimes if you're pointing your launchers like away from the center, it will just fire the rockets forward for some reason. And also it's just a box with rockets on it. That's it. It can also kill itself quite easily if you shoot targets too close to yourself. It's much better to get a vehicle which is useful, and the MLRS is not one which is useful. Don't bother with it. It's a waste of money. It's a little bit, I suppose, of uniqueness, but it is a waste if you're looking for grinding. You might as well just play the STB, Talisman that, or Talisman one of the Type 74s. Use them to be able to grind out the high BRs of the game for the Japanese tech tree. The helicopters is kind of interesting. The Kisarazu is half off, so if you're interested in grinding out Japanese helicopters, the Kisarazu isn't actually a bad idea. At 9.7, it has access to the TOW missiles. It can get up to 8 of them, which is quite nice. It also gets access to rockets and also a 20mm gun, and also flares, and as you can see, thermals. So it does have access to a lot of the little bells and whistles that helicopters get. Unfortunately, the only problem is, once again, if you want to run it in ground, it doesn't really have a lineup around it. You have to run it at 10.3, or you can run it at 9.7, I suppose, with the Type 93 if you're an absolute madman. Hopefully Japan gets more fleshed out soon. There have been stuff which, you know, has happened over the last updates which has made that happen. Once again, with the rank 1s, kind of useless because you don't get a ton of rewards on them. They're also incredibly cheap, so you can pick them up if you feel like researching through these, but generally a lot of the rank 1 Japanese stuff is actually pretty fun. Same with the Japanese aviation tree overall. You know, their zeros and their J2s and their Key 61s, a lot of them are incredibly fun. I would highly recommend playing them. The only ones I would miss out are like the Key 45s. A lot of them are not too good. And their bombers, well, they don't have a ton of bombs. So that's a bit of an issue, you know, when it comes to these vehicles. But at the end of the day, there are some really nice premiums for the Japanese. You know, the Key 44 1 Shoki is just a copy of the Key 44 1 Shoki that we have in the tree. Just has a cool skin on it. So I would definitely recommend this. The guns don't do a ton, but you can get in a position to do a ton of damage with them. You just it's kind of like the Spitfires, where it's up to you to be able to it's the plane itself gets itself into an aggressive position, and it's up to you to kill the enemy with the guns. That's basically it. That's kind of the key to a lot of these Japanese planes. They give you the initial advantage, and you have to finish off the enemy with your accuracy of fire. The Key 44 2 Otsu has 240s and 212s. This is obviously not exactly a great armament to be able to use, especially since these 40mm can be very, very hit and miss. They do have Heffy, so they're not useful in ground or anything like that. This is generally designed just as kind of a meme vehicle, I suppose. It does at least get access to some nice little skins on it, so, you know, that's nice. But generally, you know, and you've also got this one as well, which is the which I believe is the skin for the market, which is actually a really nice skin. But understand that this vehicle is generally not very useful. It's just there as kind of a gimmick. It's much better to get the standard Key 44. The F4U1A, one of the best credit grinders at low tier. When it comes to any nation, it has access to 660% SL reward and also 390% RP. One of the problems with the Corsairs at low tiers in the American tree is they are countered by a lot of Japanese and German aircraft because they can't get up to altitude quick enough to be able to be fully useful for when their team engages. That is fixed when you put the Corsair in the tree of the Japanese, because then you don't have to fight, those other vehicles. This means that you can carry a map basically by yourself with the F4U-1A Corsair. It's an incredibly good vehicle, and with those SL rewards, it's a great grinder of SL if you want to play a lot of aerialistic or RAB or anything like that. So I would recommend this. Then you've got the BF-109E7. The BF-109E7, if you're a fan of the Emil series of the BF-109s, it's a good pick. It has the same issues as other BF-109s. It does overheat, so you got to watch out for that. But overall, it's got good flight characteristics. It does only have the MGFFs, so the low velocity 20mm, and you don't get a ton of rounds on it, but because of the level it's at, 3.0, you can still, annihilate machines with the 7.92s. It's another machine that can get you into a position a lot to kill things. It's just up to you to kill them. You can't rely on this. The HAK-3 is a it's a fun vehicle, but I'm not entirely sure that I would recommend it. It does get access to some pretty cool bomb loads. It gets the 800s or the torpedoes, so you can try and use it in Naval if you want, but it's a really big target and a lot of machines can take you out quite easy. What is really nice about it is its defensive armament. It has 5 20mm on it, which is great, but it is really slow. It doesn't really have a lot of armor, and once you take damage, you really feel it. It lists hard, or, if you lose an engine, it really struggles. So it's one of those machines which is pretty fun, just because of the defensive armament and because of the bomb loads, especially since Japan, a lot of the vehicles in the tech tree struggle with their bomb loadouts, but at the same time, it's still a massive target and it's incredibly slow, just like the BI-6. The Key 102 is not a bad pickup. It has access to 220s and 212s, so it solves a few of the armament issues that a bunch of other machines have. And the Key 100 is very similar in playstyle to the Key 61. It will get you into a good position to fight, but it isn't as strong as something like a Key 44 at the level that it's at. It struggles a little bit when it comes to its rate of climb, so that means that getting into the battle and being able to dominate it, you may have to wait 2 or 3 minutes to get up to speed, but apart from that, it is not too shabby. It also has access to 2 250s, so you can use it in ground and naval if you feel like, but at the same time, there are better options. The Key 96 is useless. Don't touch this thing. The twin engines, when it comes to Japan, there are a few good ones. This one isn't it. It has access to a 37 and 220s. The 37 is not very good, and the 20s are okay. The problem is they have different muzzle velocities, so being able to hit both of them at the same time is incredibly hard to do. And the 37, it just doesn't do well at all. The problem with the heavy fighters for Japan is that there are a few which do work pretty well, like the Key 45 Co and the Key 83, but the majority of them have engine issues, meaning that they don't have enough power to be able to push the machine around after like 1 or 2 good turns, and also you will always get outmaneuvered by, well, single engine fighters. It's just unfortunately the nature of the heavy fighter, and because the 37mm is temperamental, going after bombers in this thing, you can take way more damage than you can do to them, just because the 37 just doesn't do enough for you. It is once again heavy with this 3mm, so if you use this thing to go after bombers, you may just die, because you don't have a ton of armor on the engines, so once you lose an engine, once you get set on fire, this thing burns up really bad. So I would just say no to that. The Key 61 High Tada is just a Key 61 high that you see here, and for me, I really like the Key 61. It feels like a very balanced vehicle. The only issue with it is that it's a little bit heavy, which is why something like the TIE is generally preferential to the High Tada, but I generally think that it's completely fine. It just takes a little bit of time to get up to speed, and then you can go after the enemies. It solves one of the issues that Japan has as well, which is of course the issue of of firepower. With two 20mm MG151s, you can tear apart pretty much anything, and you just have to make sure you don't get caught at low energy state, and you can do really well. Talking about a machine that can do everything, the A7N1N K9H. So this thing, it also gets the star points with this beautiful orange skin, but it gets two 20mm, the Type 99s Model 2, which aren't too bad. They have a ton of rounds as well, and then two 13.2 Type 3s. So this thing has the firepower. It also has the climb rate. It also has the flexibility. This is a machine where basically you've taken the advantages of the Zero and you've added an energy fighting component to it, very similar to the Ki 84s. So there isn't really a weakness that this plane has. It is pretty much good at everything, and kind of a jack of all trades in that regard. And even when you have a look at the secondaries, it can bring 260s as well, so you can maybe drop some bombs on some targets. Because it's something that does everything well, it pretty much means that no matter what engagement you get in, you will have some kind of advantage over your enemy, so therefore you can win the battle. A lot of the times when you have like a pure turn fighter or a pure energy fighter, if the pilot who's against you knows what they're doing, it's very easy to be able to counter you. Whereas with the A7M1, that just isn't the case, because, well, they'll always have some kind of advantage over you, and you have to try and not play to that advantage. So this one is a really nice pickup. If you've never played the A7M2 in the tree, I highly recommend this. They're a lot of fun. The Focke-Wulf 190 A5 is really cheap right now for what you get out of it. A really nice reward on it, 780% SL, which once again, it's another SL grinder. It doesn't get access to any of the secondary weapons though, which is a bit of a problem, but it does get access to two sets of 20mm and then the 7.92s as well. The problem with the Focke-Wulf is the issue that it does not have a great elevator. It is quite weak, so being able to dive on enemies and then stay on enemies is quite hard to do. Kind of different to a lot of the other Japanese planes where they're very good at sticking to enemies, apart from, you know, in a long dive. But the Focke-Wulf can stick to an enemy in a long dive, but it can't stick to an enemy if it's turning away from it. So it has the firepower, it just struggles a little bit to get guns on target, and that's where I would say it's much better to pick up something like an A7M1 than a Focke-Wulf 190 A5. Then in rank 4, they have some absolute gems, obviously the B-17. The B-17 is quite a fun little machine to have. Now that Japan doesn't just get on Pacific maps, it actually gets on the majority of maps which have bases and stuff. The B-17 is actually worth it for Japan. It's pretty good to passively grind all of the tech trees, you know, of all the way up to rank 6. You know, it's useful for rank 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So pretty much every plane, apart from 4 in the tech tree. And you can just turn your brain off and play it, and be able to make SL, make money, and drop some bombs. So yeah, it's not a bad pick actually, the B-17E, and also it may confuse enemies since, you know, it isn't Japanese. The J2M4Kai is a hell of a purchase. The J2s are incredibly good in the game. Proper energy fighters. They feel really nice to fly. They feel really lovely to play. They have good flexibility. What I mean by this is they have a good elevator, they have good rudder, they have good combat flaps, they have overall good ways of getting onto enemies, they have a decent climb rate as well, and they have really good guns. The J2s are just very, very fun to play. And this one, with the fact that it has 4 20mm, it can just do a lot of damage to enemies. Unfortunately, the secondaries, you only get 260s again, so you can't really do too much with that. But it is definitely one of those planes that I would recommend. If you've never played a J2, I would say go and play the J2M2 and just see what I'm talking about. These things feel really nice to fly in the game. Then you got the J2M5, which is a little bit, it's still fun to fly, but it only has 2 30mm with 84 rounds. So this thing's really let down by its armament, and since it is the same price as the J2M4 Kai, just pick up the Kai if you're thinking of doing one of these vehicles. Now the Ki 87 is kind of like the Ki 84, but heavier bigger and also not as good as the Key 84. The Key 87 has the firepower required to be really good, but it doesn't have the sticking power. So its rate of climb is a little bit worse than a lot of other fighters that you run into, so it takes a little bit more time to get into position to fight, and when it gets into that position, it isn't able to have, well, it doesn't have as strong an elevator and rudder as stuff like the Key 84s and the Zeros to be able to stick onto enemies. So you have to use it as like a dive and away fighter, and then back, and then boom and zoom is what I'm looking for. Very similar to how you're supposed to use a P-47, but the problem is it's less, like, it just doesn't get its guns on target as easily as some of those other planes. So for me, this is a little bit harder to use, and also it's got quite a high BR, so I would much say that something like the J-24 Kai, which actually has nearly the same rewards as the Key 87, is the way to go for it. And then obviously one that I missed is the A6M5 Co. If the Pacific pack goes on sale, I would definitely say it is worth picking this thing up, just because of the fact that it has really good rewards on it, and also it's really fun to fly, and at the same time you get a cool campaign out of it as well. Then the Blue Water Fleet, there isn't a ton of stuff here. You know that you got the Satsuki, but that's not on offer right now, and then you got the Mikuma. The Mikuma is obviously a Mogami class. It is the same as, I think, the actual Mogami. Yeah, it's just a better version, if I believe, than the Mogami class. Just has more turrets on it, more things, and also a pretty beautiful skin. This is one of those classic pay-to-win vehicles I talk about in Naval, where they're just better than their tech tree counterparts for some reason. And yeah, it's kind of as simple as that. It is 50% off, so if you are interested in playing and grinding through Naval, I'd definitely say this thing is worth it. At the same time, it might be worth having a look at the Udachi on the Gaijin market, seeing what that is. And there is a lot of useless destroyers for Japan. You know, the Kako, the Kuma, the Agano, and the Sendai, and the Furutaka. They kind of get trounced by mainly American cruisers, so it's much better to just get a premium and grind through until you get stuff like the Hyuga and the Setsu, and also stuff like the Akoma, just to have a bit of fun with. So yeah, it's if you're looking to grind Japanese naval, like these machines here are not too bad, like these four, and the Matsuki isn't great, but it's fine. The Udachi is really nice if you have it, but yeah, the other ones are a bit rough, so it might be worth thinking about the Mikuma. And then when it comes to the coastal fleet, you got the Type T14. You know, it's okay, I suppose. Once again, rank 1, so can't research a ton. The Type 4 Model 4 is a waste of time. It's a cool, like, gimmick vehicle because it has access to the engines above the water, which is kind of cool. But its actual armament and its actual use is limited. It has no crew and no real firepower, so it's just one of those gimmick vehicles. I wouldn't worry about it. Then if the PGO2 ever becomes a GE vehicle, that is definitely one to look at, and also the Akebono once it goes 50% off. So yeah, not a lot of stuff for the coastal fleet, but a bit for the blue water, which is nice, and then obviously quite a lot for the army and aviation. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Elove Goat, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez B. Young, and also Hans Vergellen, Sebastian Mizon, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.